All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Coach's Corner. I know it's been a while, and we are finally back. And of course, as always, we're going to continue to do some more. I know that we've been a little bit slower on the uploads, but we're going to try to ramp that up shortly. But for any of you who are interested in sending us questions or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and do so. And of course, feel free to like, follow, and subscribe. Click the bell icon. You guys know the deal. So we're going to get into it today. And of course, I'm joined by the legend. You got Tony, you got Ramses here. How y'all doing?
Doing well, Bam.
Pretty
Happy to
good.
be back. How about you, Tony?
Oh, living my best life. Already had a full day so far. My understanding is Ramses has as well, given that he's literally had a full day so far.
We're working with the time zones, baby. We
Yeah.
got the coaches all across the globe.
Have we reached good evening yet, or are we still good afternoon?
No, we're about 50 minutes off of good evening. So if we make this one long, we can do a good morning and a good evening podcast in the
Hell
same
yeah.
episode.
That's what's up.
That's what's up.
So, of course, today the topic at hand is going into Dormigi, right, and MinMin. And he, of course, being number one in Lumen rank, extremely quick, right? Rise in terms of just what we've seen from when Dormigi became notable until now. And really a testament to also the power level of MinMin and just his perseverance. And I think, and I'm sure, of course, we're going to get Dormigi is almost like this the Japanese nightmare come to fruition. And that's because we know since the moment this character came out, they would the Japanese community would always talk about how insane this character is and how that was their most hated character, right? By a significant margin, right? You had a lot of other characters they were worried about, but they kept saying these stupid min-mins are causing a ruckus. And it was something where we had seen kind of echo within that scene, but it was contained, right? No one else was really dealing with it. Now it's unleashed, and Dormigi is cooking people left and right. We're seeing some of the greats fall, and it's insane. So, starting off, Ramsey, how do you feel about that number one placement for Dormigi, and most importantly, how do you feel about what he's been able to bring to the table with MinMin?
Yeah, really good questions. I think the thing about Ultimate is that it's always been a weird game with regards to zoners, right? Like Samus is like when people talk about, oh, then you close the gap against Samus and Pac-Man and then they box you out, right? Like there's a lot of complaints about kind of like the design of zoners. And MinMin has some of that as well, right? Like especially before the Nair nerf, her Nair was really, really potent up close tool. Up smash out of shield, disproportionately good. Has some amazing normals outside of that. Like the dash attack should not go that far. Then down tilt should not be that much of a low profile. But generally a little bit less so, right? Like if you make it in, generally you're strong. And so MinMin in that sense is like such a different dynamic than the other zoners, because if you think about like the actual zoner weakness for most zoners in Smash, it's control, right? Like, okay, they're strong at range, they're strong up close, but they generally don't have a lot of control over what range they're in, right? Like Samus is not the fastest character, subpar rolls, one of the worst jumps in the game. Pac-Man, not known for mobility either. Villager, Isabelle, right? Like a lot of these owners, Richter, not great mobility-wise, but they can fight in almost any situation. And so how do you fight them? Well, you use the fact that they're not that mobile, that you have that advantage. You create situations that they don't want to be in, and then you beat them up. MinMin changes that to a large degree because she's super mobile. She's one of the more mobile characters in the game because she can move while attacking, which, there's a few characters in the game that can do that. Of course, everyone can do it with aerials, but Steve can jab up tilt walk. Mega Man can do pellets and walk. And then there's MinMin who has her arms and she can jump and walk. And so it's a very unique property that makes her disproportionately mobile compared to other zoners. And so a lot of the ways that people have kind of figured out how to deal with zoners don't really apply to MinMin. And so seeing someone like Doramigi figure out how to play this more long-range game and how to abuse that mobility more, because to me, like one of the biggest differentiating factors between Doramigi and the other MinMins, outside of just like how hard they hit, is the positioning. I think Doramiga's positioning is miles ahead of his peers, and that's partially because he positions thinking about the movement that arms give him, whereas other MinMins will just like stand in the corner as if they're playing Samus, as if they're playing Pac-Man, and kind of try to say, okay, well, I'm going to keep you out of this corner. And this just doesn't work for MinMin. And so there's some like positioning thing that has been correct there for Doramigi. There's of course the punish game, which is absurd. having that reward on arms is insane. And there's still like the scary thing is there's still way more room to grow. I think MinMin as a character has way more room to grow. But seeing Doramiga use these factors and kind of like tune into that unique movement and in turn kind of like the unique positioning that MinMin needs, I think it's been great. I think there is some degree of what we've been talking about with Steve in previous episodes where it's like, okay, well, what? Maybe this character is overperforming a little bit because people are not really practicing the matchup as much as they should be. Because it is a complex matchup and it is a unique matchup, and there's only a few people that are succeeding with the character, which at the time when we were talking about Steve was also the case, right? Like it was Akla and then like on in. But outside of that, I mean, we had Jake for a while. It wasn't much. And now we're seeing a similar thing where there's really like only one MinMin to prepare for, and so people are woefully unprepared for the matchup. And so I don't know how that's going to pan out. With Steve, I was pretty certain that as people get better against Steve, overall he's going to be a little bit weaker. With MinMin, I feel like as people get better against MinMin, I think there's still so much more that MinMin players, and with that, I mean, you should really, I should really say Doramigi, can do. I'm actually not sure if the character is going to end up being weaker or stronger. But I definitely feel like what we're seeing right now is it looks a little bit like week 1 ultimate pilled, right? Like, okay, this is my second time fighting MinMin. I died at 60. Okay, I guess I shouldn't jump there. I mean, maybe you should have known if MinMin is in grand finals. There's more to say. I think in the meta, of course, MinMin is great, right? She does well against all these like single player game type characters, because she can interact with them without really putting herself at much risk. So like a lot of things coming together for Doramigi to succeed, and I think he's doing a great job making use of it. I'd like to see him form more. I'd like to see people prepare for MinMin better. And at the end of the day, I think what we're really seeing is that being able to move while attacking is broken, because I mean, at the same time as Doramigi rising, we also see all the Steves do better, and we see Pibna do better. So like all the move attack characters are crescendoing. They're all coming together at the top of the tier list, which I think is really cool. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think the person who has predicted this more than anyone is Tony. So Tony, tell me what you think about Doramigi's rise and MinMin in the current meta.
Well, actually, before I start, I'd actually like to hear what you think MinMin players should be doing going forward, like how they should be growing MinMin from here at top level.
Yeah, I mean, getting a little bit into the nitty gritty here, but the TLDR is, I think the biggest weakness for MinMin is that her capacity of kind of like directly mixing someone up is actually pretty subpar, because her arms don't do significant enough shield damage to really set up into shield poke scenarios, right? And her grab is substantially committal, especially for a character with a disadvantage like that. And then like her normals don't really mix up for much either. Her jump ins are not right. Like a Roy will jump in and like empty land jab you or some shit. Like what's MinMin gonna do? And so like her strength is she gets to kind of like interact with you with very little risk at like these longer ranges. And the weakness is, I mean, the interactions don't really mean much. And so in that sense, I think when people kind of realize, well, okay, the moments where MinMin is weakest is when she has to actually kind of like mix me up. And that's where I want to interact. I think that's where a lot of people are kind of like missing counterplay. I think like the biggest thing that people are doing wrong is they're fighting MinMin when MinMin's strong. It's like, imagine like Steve puts up a block wall and like you're playing like, I don't know, like Rosalina or like Luigi, and you full hop over the block wall and you land on the platform and then you like fall through the platform and then like you're getting up tilted like 50 times while you're doing all of that. Like that's kind of how it feels to me. That's kind of like what I see. Like people will fight MinMin when she's weak. Makes no sense. But at the same time, it's like because MinMin always kind of has the initiative in terms of kind of like being able to prod at you, she gathers an insane amount of information theoretically, right? Because she starts forcing you to kind of like act, even if it's just defensively, even if it's in a way that she cannot do much about, she can do things about it, right? And like you can say, okay, well, her grab is very committal. I mean, it is, but it's still a grab, and it's still going to be a tool that the opponent has to respect. And so when we see MinMins start to gather more minute information based on kind of like let's say, interactions that normally would not lead to many mix-ups. When they start actually leading that into mix-ups, from which they can position themselves to pressure, even if that pressure is super implicit and theoretically the pressure itself is not very MinMin favored. It's still pressure that she puts on you that you cannot really reverse on her, as in, like, it's not like you can pressure her back. You can, at best, avoid the pressure or read the pressure and hit her. When MinMin start kind of playing around that range and that threat, I think there's a lot more to be gained. But MinMins right now are getting away with just like playing at like just max range and throwing shit out because people are fighting her when she's strong, right? So like people run into it. They don't have to. And I mean, they should nonetheless, because like, you know, push all your advantages, but they don't have to. And so like, I think there's a lot to be gained there for MinMin players where I feel like they should gather more information from mix-ups that don't seem very profitable and lead into more, let's say, implicit pressure from that position of coverage because of how many situations are situations in which she could pressure. And so seeing that game of inches, I think it's really missing in MinMin's play, but it's because people don't know how to play the game of inches against her.
So to build on that toward my view of MinMin, it's that she, I won't even say is counterintuitive. It's more so a matter of ultimate typically does not reward patience directly. It's usually something that comes up in a different layer of play. Like if you, generally what happens is you are playing to establish your play, and then from there you build on that, on what the opponent did or didn't do to stop you, or if their own establishment is more powerful than yours, more rewarding than yours. And so in a later layer extending from that point is usually when things like patience and, well, you're going to have a certain opening, but it's not necessarily something that you want to focus on to begin with. So to that end, MinMin typically has, I won't say the most rewarding establishing play, but by definition of her range, the comparable ranged characters typically are going to have their own establishment trumped by her. And as a sentiment that I think we've expressed on this channel many times, mid-range establishment tends to be meta. So being able to have around a dash dance or so between your opponent, which is unfortunately a little bit too close for MinMin. And so I think people just, their base level of play, their base positioning tends to be poor versus MinMin. And so going back to what Ramses said about a game of inches, what we typically need to see is we need to either lure MinMin into putting herself out of position, or we need to be outside of that range and be extra long range to that goal, and then play a game of segments. So one of the things that I think Dormigi as a player does that I don't notice as much from other MinMin players is, when possible, to specifically set up for whiffs rather than to set up for shield pressure directly, to circumvent one of the issues that Ramsey specifically mentioned MinMin has, which is a decreased ability to shield pressure. So to that end, I think that a lot of lower level players in particular, or people who are unfamiliar with the MinMin matchup, don't realize is that MinMin is incredibly unsafe on shield. So she is this is both in practice because of the additional hit lag, and also because of the in lag penalty she suffers when she connects an attack with the shield. So these things make it easier to react and respond if MinMin is specifically out of position, is specifically set up to have done something unsafe or right next to you. As a combination of both of these things, is you can then react to that and go ahead and punish it consistently. With that said, it's difficult to do that with Doramigi, because while Doramigi does like to attack with a pretty fast tempo, it is with the goal of minimizing those windows whenever possible. So one of the most common openings I've noticed from Doramigi, for example, not that I've seen too much of Doramigi footage, just due to relevancy to the States. So as a quick aside, for those who don't know, most of my exposure to Smash play is going to be in response or in preparation for specific player or character matchups. It's not necessarily like I just watch tournaments. So it's possible for a tournament like Supernova to happen and for me to have seen little to none of the footage for it. Because unless I'm having a specific player who is looking over their matches from there, or unless I'm specifically studying a match that happened at that event for a different event, then I'm probably not going to watch it. I don't watch Smash recreationally, not because I dislike Smash, but because there's just not enough time in the day. So, with that said, players like Doramigi, and part of what makes them novel or effective as a novelty is that when you have someone like Doramigi, who I believe only attended like 6 events this year or some such, so averaging about every month and a half or so. And obviously, most of those are going to be Japanese events. So if most players I work with are North American or European or South American, so Western Hemisphere roughly, then it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to pay attention to the results of a Japanese player versus Japanese meta matchups, because Japanese characters are less likely to appear in Europe or North America than they are in Japan. Surprise. So with that said, a lot of Doramigi's interactions, matchup-wise, or player-wise, are going to be novel versus people preparing, because Min is both an uncommon matchup here. There's very few relevant top Min both in history of Ultimate and also especially currently, because so many of the, just within top Min, many of those Min do not currently compete for one reason or another. So, to return to my point, looking at Doramigi, one of the first openings I notice is that Doramigi has a preference for going for air-to-airs. So you'll usually see something like a ram forward tilt with a jump. This is a combination of both what I was talking about before about the whiffs, and also I don't usually reference player habits here out of respect thing, but Doramigi has a strong jump habit preference. So generally in scrambles, in positions where there is shield pressure, in positions where there are mix-ups, Doramigi is more likely to press the jump button than any other button, like shield, or pressing a subsequent attack button, things of that nature. So with that considered, we want to ask ourselves, well, with these different biases included, are there going to be combinations of these? So if Doramigi both likes to whiff and Doramigi also likes to jump, is it likely for behaviors that Doramigi commits that can enable both of these things to happen? And my answer to that currently is yes, with me watching VODs of Doramigi, obviously versus Hertz Sonic in particular, for reasons I'm sure our viewers can guess. We want to try and disprove that theory and look for examples of, well, when doesn't Doramigi go for jump tilts? When doesn't Doramigi intentionally go for attacks that, if they aren't connecting, are going to whiff? And so things like that are what I'm looking for, and examples of that are things that I find, because notice I didn't say he always goes for these things. It's a matter of the exceptions are where the meat and potatoes are going to be. So typically what Doramigi does is goes for these whiffs and then responds to what happened. And so he does have a preference, but if he sees you go for a specific counter, he's very likely to counter what he's seen. For example, if he sees you in certain positions, so for example, around ledge roll distance under the platform, that is typically the space in which Doramigi as a player is going to commit to going for things like grabs, going things for like smash attacks where he's certain to be punished. And so one of the lessons I took away from his set with Hurt was that Hurt specifically was identifying these tells, and I'm still trying to learn, because Hurt is probably better educated on Doramigi's perceptions of these things than I am. And so learning just from some of the lessons that Hurt took away from that going into his sets with him, you can consistently, or rather more than 50% of the time that Dormigi goes for these, you can see Hurt go for a very strong reversal, something like as powerful as roll-in forward smash, which is just about as big of a commitment as you can get. So Hurt was very confident in making these reads, and obviously we also saw this pay negative dividends when he was going for things like strong homing attacks. I don't know how much of that was relating to him planning for that as part of his edgeguard sequences in abstract, or how much of it was specifically because of Doramigi and MinMin. But comparing this with the previous MinMin master, Proto-Banam, who was also a very strong positioning player, typically what we see from Dormigi that Proto-Banam didn't have, I would say, is a grasp over timing as an athletic skill. And by that I mean, one of the issues that people have with MinMin, and why people dislike MinMin, is that many of the play patterns are fully reactable. Like if you are recovering versus MinMin and you're being edge guarded, both players have the luxury of seeing what's coming pretty far in advance. And this leads to what can and sometimes should be essentially a cutscene of just watching MinMin's arms come at you, you air dodge, and then the following position gets you hit anyways. And so even though it's this predictable, this easy to see coming, you don't see MinMin players executing the follow-ups anyways. And when they do, they don't finish the cycle. So sometimes it's 2 to 3 reps of just going for this trap of just frame trapping the air dodge and then following up and true punishing the air dodge. And many characters can't deal with this position. And so what we'll see is we don't see MinMin players follow up on this as an athletic skill. And so what I think Dormigi does that no MinMin has done is to specifically find these points in unconventional positions. So things like going down all the way for things like drop zone edge guards. The only other player I can think of to do this is probably Proto. And the key difference there, though, is that Proto-Banam wasn't able to maintain this at certain high tempos. And so if you could position Proto-Banam into discomfort, then you could probably seal the set against him through that pattern. Versus Doramigi, Dormigi is less likely to consider and think through to a different position than Proto-Banam was. But what he is prone to do is powerful within the context of Ultimate, or rather is a meta decision that we see in the context of Ultimate, which is he will actually attempt to force his way through positions that he's not allowed to. And then if the opponent makes any form of error, then he's actually going to get an entirely different position out of it. So an example of this would be one of Dormigi's habits is after you smack him off stage, is you'll see MinMin immediately buffer out usually a ram forward air to try and smack you out and prevent you from being able to follow up. And essentially that sets it up so that you have to play a sub game. And so we see this, it's essentially a much harder version of the Kazuya laser check for edge guards, where you have a 50-50 of, well, if I just wait for this hit and then parry it, then I'm going to get an even bigger advantage than if I just ran into the laser. But then if your opponent expects you to wait for the parry on the ram, then all MinMin needs to do is just recover normally without putting out any attacks while you are flicking your shield and giving them that time while you with the shield flick. So whenever given the chance, Dormigi favors going for this establishment, which is, as we've are now coming back full circle to the neutral, Dormigi favors going for establishment pretty much always. And whenever Dormigi doesn't go for establishment, it's because he has a specific read on what the opponent's doing to counter it. And so the counter for this is most typically he is going to try and rotate his ledge options, but he's going to do so in a way so that whichever mix-up he does go for, it's going to be one that gets him towards center stage so that he can go for like ledge roll, ledge jump past. He likes his most favorite option, of course, is attacking from ledge, surprise, and going for cross-up so that he these are similar behaviors that we see in some of the best positioning players in the game. So you see this in Leo, you see this in Spargo. This is not new. This is not new habit sets. What is new is just the athleticism in which he maintains it. And then because he's trying to force past, and because people are so unpracticed against the novelty of executing versus MinMin in particular, it's not that the flow charts are different, it's that the flow charts are a little bit faster, and people, as Ramses mentioned, are a little bit less practiced versus them. So, Bam, did you get a chance to see more of the sets of Supernova with Dormigi in particular, or?
Yeah, I jumped through some of them. And yeah, it's interesting because kind of like to your point, I want to touch on two things. Something that you said and also like Ramsey said earlier on, right? Where it is like it's very interesting because like you said, because of the mid range that people like are like mid range is king, usually in honestly in like a multitude of games, like not even just zooming out of ultimate, even in just general and fighting games, that's such a big space and proponent, right? And um then you get certain characters that their goal is to disrupt that, right? Because that for them, that's space they can fight at effectively without having the inherent risk that most characters would have, right? Due to the proximity to close range, etc. Um, Obviously, one of the characters that very similar to Min, obviously there's some differences, but like traditional fighters would be Dhalsim, right? Sim players kind of like operating in that space. And I think it's very funny because even some of the things that we do see from Min, like you guys were talking about, the patience. Usually when someone has to play like against a sim player with that, one of the biggest things like how do you walk someone down appropriately, right? How do you slowly kind of get in that space? How do you understand the value of your positioning is like it's like 10x what it usually would be in a game because of that reward mattering. It matters so much when you're going up against that matchup, right? And because of and this is what you were saying, Tim, because like this ultimate, and because of it's like the fast-paced game, because of what people tend to look for, they tend to like kind of just disregard that, right? And it's like yes, the positioning matters, but they also understand that they can kind of shift that. They feel like it's more easy for them to shift that and kind of go about their pace, right? And kind of like reposition. Whereas like that is so it's much more dire when you're going up against a character like Min Min. So come back to what you were saying, like yeah, I had a chance to watch some of the matches from Dormigi, and yeah, he had some brutal ones. All right. I mean, even I was thinking of when Doramigi went up against Spargo, right? And kind of like some of the simple things where it was kind of the game winner, right? Where like Spargo had whiffed a bear off stage for the edge guard. And there's just a lot of times when Dormigi is just watching these players like just hang themselves, right? And he's just like, oh, you're just like usually another character would hit you here and it's like kind of okay. But it's like, oh, you just gave me everything.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things like with Dormigi where you see a lot of like it's not just like them abusing the fact that people are trying to fight and take the game mid range. Is like I don't need to be in the house with you, dude. I'm outside shooting at you. I don't like I don't care what you're doing in there. You can sit there have a good time. You can be in the living room. I'm not even in the vicinity. I might not even be in the neighborhood. I'm still pressuring you. Like I don't care. But then it's like you'll see kind of the rush, the fast pace, right? That you'll see from Spargo, which obviously this is how he just pressures people and breaks them down, right? With the amount of like actions and decisions he makes, like in these moments, he's so quick, right? And we talk about that with him. We talk about that with like Light, and it's one of those things where it's like they just start to wear you down, and then they start getting these crazy conversions and everything, right? But it's like Dormy is just sitting back, and he's like, "That tit for tat, that's cool. It's whatever." Um, oh, you stepped on that zone, you're dead. Like, oh,
Hmm.
you're in that positioning, which again wouldn't really matter for these guys because they usually will just outpace people in their decision making and like their speed, and it's fine. But for him, he's just literally looking like it almost feels like kind of random analogy, but it almost feels like you're in a dungeon. And when people are walking around a dungeon doing all those things, and it's like, oh, you stepped on that one block. Oh, that was a trap block. You're dead. Like you should not ever be there. And
That's
yeah,
why
you
you
just see
that's why
that
you
time
bring
and
a
time.
rogue. That's why you bring a rogue. You got to check the
Yeah,
traps
man.
in.
You gotta check the
You got to
traps, and
check the
that's the problem
traps.
because everyone thinks it's just stable ground and they can move wherever they want. And yeah, I do think a part of it is that this character, a lot of people are not playing at a high level. Like it is very different when you play a solid min, right? I think a lot of times what will happen, and this tends to happen in this kind of character archetype too, where it's like if you're not at that level, people aren't even thinking about the matchup because like I'm just jumping over your arms and then I just hit you and you're off stage and you don't know how to recover in the end. Now, do I think people can get better at sniping MinMin's recovery? Oh, absolutely, 10 billion%. But people think that it's okay. I'll win enough interactions to get enough opportunities, and I'll get the edge guard and call it a day. No, Doramigi is not allowing you to do that. He's not gonna be hit off stage all day, and like you said, like he's going to check you with that ram. He's gonna establish that immediately. So it's like, okay, I gotta stop and pause. And by then it's like, hey, you know what? You missed one edge guard opportunity, and you're not getting the 6, 7, 8 that you may get with some other min if you've played any decent min to begin with. That's a whole other thing, right? Like odds are you probably haven't even played a decent min. But if you are gonna get anything, you're getting maybe 3 opportunities, to get like a really solid edge guard that could actually make a major difference in the game. And if you're not able to cash out on those things, Dormigi's getting back and he's just beating you down, right? And even things like full hopping over, right? He's anticipating that because a lot of these things are kind of standard affair how people try to get in Ultimate, right? The dash-ins and the full hops, tools that are insanely strong in this game. But just so happens, playing a character that will cook you for that, right? And habitually cook you for that. So I think that it's always just beautiful to see that in Doramigi, how aware they are and so attuned to like, okay, I will take all this, take the damage, I'll take these situations. Oh, that's the one where I can just kill you. And then that's how he goes about it, right? And I love that. I also want to see as more players get more accustomed to this character, like they need to take this character seriously because that like this character is going to rob you otherwise.
Oh
This
yeah.
character is a robber. This character's a robber, and unfortunately, because people like there's only one person that they're looking out for, right? Proto, like you said, Peckham doesn't really play anymore.
Chag.
Doing the thing at Riot. That's the Peckham, you know. Then it's like, of course, we talked about Proto Ban already too, and
Chag. You
it's just
have Pew in
Chag.
Europe. You
Yep.
have the Buzz, who's competing for college esports now, and I know he has a
Very
min
good.
I
min.
think he's more so the coach on that team.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah.
I actually did not know.
So,
Yeah, I think so.
but
Yeah.
either way, I don't think people should be preparing for the DeBuzz Min when they're looking at their top 32 matchup
I
preparation.
agree. I'm just saying, like there's
Mhm.
some whisperings of min, but she's
Yeah.
definitely rare.
Yeah, she's obscenely rare, right? So I understand why, but if you're looking to this at this point, if you're looking to win a tournament, and it's like a major tournament at least, because again, Tori Migi's not even traveling to that many tournaments. He's just doing the things that he needs to do, right? So it's like it's so that's another nuance, right? But um I think, hey, if you're trying to win, you're going to these majors, this guy's number one. You gotta at least get some of these basic principles down. And I still feel like some of those are like a lot of people, they know the matchup on the purely like lower level side, and even for the high to top players, they only know it on the lower level side, and because so they can run over some lull like mid-level min or whatever that they randomly run into, and then they can call it a day. Oh, I'm just gonna throw this person off stage and I'm gonna edge guard them. It's fine. But the character it has always been scary, and this is why the Japanese community was always so fearful of this character, right? And just the sheer kill power. Like, yeah, Spargo literally whiffed a bear, like going back to what the story was saying, he whiffed a fallout bear for edge guard and then Dormigi's like, oh, that's cool, and he just did reverse nair and he just killed him. That was it. That was the end of the tournament. He like died at like 3
Yeah.
like off edge guard, and it's just normal positions that people could chase, and they would feel that they would be okay because I'd take a little hit here and I'd come back and be good, you know. And I think this once again calls attention. Also, people need to improve at the edge guarding game in Ultimate, regardless of what they say that edge guarding isn't as strong in Ultimate. Blah 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 blah. There is definitely avenues in which people can improve, and I think that's something that holistically would be good for people to invest in. So maybe not just only specifically min, but I think that people just need to invest more in edgeguarding in this game, because I think that some of the characters right now, especially some of these that are just ripping through stocks, right? They have issues off stage, but most people still aren't punishing these characters to the extent they should be. And then they get on stage and they're gods and they get cooked. So that was kind of my takeaway from watching Doramigi play. But overall, like, shout out to Doramigi for holding it down and showing the hypothetical Min that everyone is afraid of, bringing it into full being. And I'm really interested to see how they continue through the course of the just like ultimate, right? As we go through, as we're in the twilight period of the game.
So I'm grateful that you made the comparison between MinMin and Dulcim. So for a little bit of out of context, but I was working with the Evo crew and then working with some of the same crew going into Supernova Week because they were back-to-back events. So we go in there, and so there's people who aren't really familiar with Ultimate and asking me questions about Dormigi because I'm the Smash guy on the crew. So I explained it as, it's Dulcim if they thought that there's too much commitment. So, and that was generally how I described it to the Street Fighter people on the crew.
I like that.
They're like, oh wow, no wonder people complain about this character now. I was like, yeah, she's not that good, but yeah, you can see why that might be a problem. With that said, I'm actually. So I was really interested in seeing what MinMin can do on a consistency basis. And I do agree with Ramses that there's a lot Dormigi can do. I'm not sure how much of that is pushing MinMin and how much of that is just pushing athletic ability and giving a prodigy time to get older and improve at the game more. Like I don't think that Dormigi is at Dormigi's limit, if that makes sense. So
well, I would say, just to respond to that real quick, like, I understand what you're saying, but I do think like the concepts that you would grow into, as universal as they are channeled in a pretty unique way through MinMin.
I agree on that for sure. I think that an issue with MinMin in particular, this is both as a coach and also just learning, is there's, for me personally, the ways and skills in which Dormigi is good are ways and skills that I'm least competent in. And communicating those is also probably my weakest language to communicate. So it's very clear in my mind what I expect from Dormigi, and I can visualize the counters just fine. However, explaining it concisely requires a level of musical notation I don't have. So I think that a lot of what is so excellent about Dormigi is not what he's doing or the particular advancements he's doing. Like, I don't think that he's particularly. I don't think it's a matter of, oh, well, if Chag was doing this, he'd be number 2 or number 1 in the world. I think it's a matter of there's just certain athleticism to it. It's similar to what we see with Spargo. It's not that you just aren't back airing right. It's that when they come, how he's forcing these positions, his game sense, with game sense being defined as his perception of what is both visible and invisible on the screen, as well as seeing how the game is about to progress. Like being able to look at opening moves and seeing the next 10 turns played out in his mind. Those are what's excellent about Dormigi. However, I think that on that same front, because it is such a novel matchup, which is why I keep referring to it as Dormigi and not MinMin, is that Dormigi's MinMin is so based on Dormigi that understanding how to beat MinMin is a basic entry requirement. Like using the Spargo example, if Spargo had not whiffed that back air on the edge guard, then it's the difference between him taking a stock versus him losing a stock at almost any percent. And so I think the same thing applies to Cloud, and that these are both glass cannon characters, and the definition that at any point their stock is at risk, and at any point your stock is at risk. So I think that it just requires a set of skills that some people might describe as smash skills, which we've discussed on this channel in a previous episode of what it means to have smash skills. In the
Fundamentals.
first place, or what are fundamentals? Yes. So it's not something where you can just pick up and execute in a straightforward manner. But I would say that the ways that it is difficult is just as difficult as, say, a Kazuya combo. It's just a matter of the specific avenue of how that skill is practiced and iterated upon is less obvious for MinMin than it is for, oh, but if I can execute this sequence, then I get this reward. So the nebulousness of that, or ambiguity of it, for most people makes it less tangible. And so I think that's an issue. So learning to define that and then countering specifics from there is going to be Doramigi based, not MinMin based. So just again, going back to the Hurt set, because Hurt is most of what I have seen versus Doramigi in particular. So it's just my own limited scope. So pardon my limited education on this, but just using that as an example, Hurt generally seems to be winning neutral more often, with winning neutral being defined as starting openings that should have led to a drastic reward. Usually the ones I'm referring to in particular could have been the stock, and then not completing it to the point where he was winning neutral more than Doramigi was, but the hits Doramigi were connecting were just so much more rewarding. And then on top of that, Hurt was typically overextending on his attempts to get these punishes. So, for example, when he's going for his edge guards, he's usually full sending it time-wise. So even if he could recover back, he usually would take so long to recover that Dormi was able to position himself in stage so that it became Dormi's ledge trap at best. And then as Hurt started committing less to this, he started missing out on certain mix-ups, like, for example, referencing what Bam was talking about with edge guards. One of the key tools that Hurt was using was going for single hit spring and trying to lead the shot so that it would connect with the drift pattern for MinMin, so that MinMin would drift into spring. And so the counter for Doramigi, or any MinMin player there, is you just don't get hit. You just stay outside of the drift instead of trying to recover normally, and you recover around it.
You just don't get hit. That's the counterplay. Yeah. Isaiah, I missed you. You're back.
Well, fundies truly always are forever.
They're forever. They're eternal. No. I get what you mean. It's you engage with the recovery specifically to avoid a spring, is what you mean.
Yeah. You burn time. You stall out. But obviously, if you just hang out and chill out in the most vulnerable position possible, that's generally how you lose games. But if you're using it as a specific call out to what is effectively an RPS interaction, then all Hurt has to do is just pretend he's going to spring and then actually overshoot an attack to catch it. And so what Hurt's actual response to this was typically was going for homing attack, and then he started having some difficulty on managing the risk reward of that scenario. And this is actually something I specifically expect Hurt to do much better next time they play, both because it was so high impact on when it turned out poorly that it's going to make a mental register of, oh, hey, I really need to fix this scenario. And also B, because I was under the impression that Hurt was specifically aware of this dynamic and trying to figure it out essentially on the fly. And what my personal answer to this question was just going out with forward airs, sonic forward airs, and trying to position it so that you can connect it later. And Kurt's relative inexperience with Sonic was showing because he was spacing his recoveries in a way that were a little overly generous. And by that, I mean, whenever you're seeing his recovery, even if you're not familiar with Sonic in particular, you can tell that he's going to make it to the ledge because there's so much grace, so much wiggle room that he's just going to make it back. He did not stress how far Sonic can go, like what his threat range was off stage. And so once Doramigi understood that there's essentially a domain, or you can draw a circle around the stage where Hurt's willing to go, and MinMin is still capable because Doramigi is a master of what those circles are for MinMin. And so once Doramigi found that there was a circle he could enter that Hurt couldn't reach consistently, he would feint going for a drift in, and then on reaction to Hurt going out to Edgeguard, just go back out to the outside of that circle and then recover from there. And Hurt didn't really find an answer to this. Again, that forward air is my answer. However, typically in these situations, there's more than one. So something I'm looking forward to is seeing what Hurt's take away from there, because Hurt's a very smart man. And so he might come up with an entirely different answer to what I do. And so that's a real learning opportunity for me in particular going forward that I'm looking forward to. It could be homing attack and he just overshoots his drift and then goes for weak homing attack. That would be a possible solution that I like less, mostly just because of the control over the sonic forward air drift. And then on the flip side, looking at Doramigi Edgeguarding, a situation that came up very often was we already referenced the air dodge trap with MinMin's arms, where you use arm 1 to bait out the air dodge or force out the air dodge, usually a weak hit, and then you go for the strong hit to true punish, where you can hit confirm that you're hitting the weak hit, and then reset, and then try the situation again until you finally get that air dodge, or you just get 5 weak hits to edgeguard. In which case, yeah, sure. If you got the technical execution to just loop it 5 times in a row, go for it. That requires a level of athleticism that is not even a handful of players right now, relevant top level. So again, this comes down to it ain't anything deep. It's just can you run the race? If so, let's go over there. It's not that complicated. It is obviously that hard, or we would see more people doing it. So something we saw from Hurt is, again, going back to his recoveries, because he's giving himself so much wiggle room, it made him less comfortable with going for variation within his mix-ups. So like something we didn't see very often was him going for auto snap springs that weren't exactly just a specific distance. And when he wasn't going for those, his alternative was basically an early late 50-50, where he would either up B directly to ledge, or he would up B and then use a directional air dodge to reach ledge. But there are many ways to directional air dodge to ledge and have timing mix-ups between those two ranges. And so he's missing the secret third thing sauce that comes from being more nuanced within character mastery. And this is one of those cases where character mastery is very relevant to what's getting done. This is the difference between being an excellent player with a strong secondary versus an excellent player with an excellent secondary. So as Hurt develops within that specific matchup and that specific character control, I think these are things that we can see going forward. But those are also specific things that I personally would recommend to someone looking forward. And to that end, to abstract this out, and I apologize for getting into the weeds so much this episode. I know this isn't something that everybody's going to be interested in, but for those who are, something else that as an abstract, as someone who's been around a while, whenever I see a prodigy, and again, to reiterate, the reason I care about this is because the player variation within MinMin is so small that we can narrow our focus to a specific subgroup of people. So we have experienced competitors like Chag, of course, but we also are going to have the prodigy type. So when you are a 15-year-old playing a character and you spent half of your life playing the game, yes, you are still going to be experienced, but it also means that you cannot possibly have the same frame of reference of people who have been competing and playing Smash at a high level for more than 15 years. Just by definition, you cannot possibly have that. So either the sum of the game can be learned and we can just start reaching our ceilings within those 15 years, which is not my experience, or there are lessons that we have learned as experienced competitors that prodigies might not have learned yet. So even though they can be very athletically gifted, even though they can understand the most high impact truths of the game or some such, so they've grabbed all the low-hanging fruits, they haven't grabbed all the fruits off the tree. So what mix-ups are available against MinMin and Doramigi in particular that Doramigi might not have necessarily figured out the answers to? So for example, what do you do when you know someone is consistently going to neutral air out of disadvantage, and that when they don't, they are going to jump. So just as a specific application of a specific habit here, something else we've mentioned before is something like option selecting. So why can't you parry, and then within that same timing, without waiting to hit confirm that you get the parry, jump? So that you either jump so that you're set in position to start an aerial punish on what should be a double-digit advantage window because you just parried an air, or you flick shield and then within the less than a roughly 1/10 of a second that you spent doing so, you then cancel it into a jump squat so that you can jump to call out the MinMin double jump. And of course, this is simply answered by, well, what if MinMin then air dodges and drifts? And so if you can find a way to implement this jump while also positioning yourself so that that jump is going to turn into something that pressures the air dodge, then you've effectively covered every possible outcome, or almost every outcome, from MinMin's 3 things that she can mix up there within essentially the same button press at the same timing without taxing your decisions whatsoever. It's just something you do without having to think about it if you've practiced. So within the same example, Dormigi has specific preferences on where he's going to air dodge to, which is going to typically be under a platform, which if you do something like short hop fast fall down below the platform, you don't have to true punish the air dodge. You just have to set up pressure, because as a specific weakness of MinMin is that she tends to be weaker against pressure. So as long as you aren't under that threshold for getting essentially up smashed out of shield, which if I remember correctly is going to be frame 8. So as long as you're not within that frame 8 window on setup, which most characters pressuring on that close with a landing aerial is going to be -7 or better, then you can just go ahead and go there and then have a shield off point blank against a character with a below average grab in that context, who does not have an excellent escape tool or a way to quickly pressure your shield up close there either. And then also typically doesn't have very high reward outside of the grab. So within that context, this allows you to set up one advantageous position, and then the other positions are just usually going to be direct hits. So from there, you just have to make sure your hits are positioning MinMin into places she does or doesn't want to be. So where doesn't MinMin want to be? And typically that is pretty much anywhere that isn't a horizontal length pressure. So things like if she's not able to pressure you with the distance of her arms, and also she doesn't like being above you unless she's directly landing on you with an air in a specific context. So something that Dormigi again has advanced though is to expanding the contexts for which connecting an air from above you is valuable to MinMin. And that's one of the things that Dormigi does well, is just converting those positions into not just, oh yay, I got to land on the stage, but also, oh yay, this is actually an advantage for me now. But if you understand what the specific drifts are that MinMin requires for that, and you can DI accordingly so that those drifts don't match up for the hits that MinMin needs, then even if you do get clipped by the nair, you're getting a neutral reset instead of getting reversaled. So it's just a bit of nuance that requires just a bit of practice and preparation. If you, the overall sequence requires a significant amount of practice. So like even if people were preparing for, say, Riptide from Supernova, within that context, I don't think they would be prepared unless they were full sending their practice, which I'll address in a bit, but you want to make sure that your positions are putting MinMin either off stage or in juggle positions, and then you specifically need to space around her down air plus her aerials within the context of, I'm not going to get hit by forward air, and if I do get hit by an air, it's not going to lead into forward air. It's not going to lead into an up air either. And it's not going to allow her to, this used to be what it was, the extent of it. However, something that Dormigi has pushed is just because you're not getting true combo doesn't mean it's not a disadvantageous position. So you also want to position it so that you have enough time to land without having to make an air dodge decision, because Dormigi will use a single arm hit to trap the air dodge and then react to what you pick after as a read. So he is making a read on this. However, it's typically with a delay built into the beginning because he's relying on the pressure that he's built up through the fast tempo of the rest of the set to basically slam on the brakes as the car, just look and see where you parked, and then go drive full speed at that again. And we can see this where, and particularly when he's going for tech chases, you'll see things like he'll get a light MinMin hit, or sorry, light Ram hit that sets into a tech chase, and then you'll see him go for another single hit Ram to try and connect. And if you tech in a way that enables that to miss, he'll sometimes go for something like an immediate full hop and then go for a follow-up hit because he'll expect you to tech and then try and jump out of that situation, because people typically try to counterplay MinMin arms by jumping over them rather than being in that horizontal plane. So as long as you can force MinMin to be outside of that horizontal plane, not just being outside of it, because if MinMin's the reason that you're out of there, then that means MinMin's going to start up some set play with the extra time while she waits for you to land. So you want to make sure to go back to that, what happens when you hit MinMin above you? Why can't you just parry the nair? Even if you do parry the nair and hit her, you need to hit her in a way that shuts her out of that horizontal plane or sets up for a juggle, but doesn't allow her to just nair back onto a platform accordingly, or else you're not setting yourself up for a strong advantage, in which case we go back to what happens if I'm playing versus Cloud and I don't edgeguard Cloud. We're talking about an entirely different matchup all of a sudden. So you have to put the glass into the glass cannon. But to go on, if we need to practice all of this, do I recommend practicing all of this if you are a top player? And the answer is maybe not, actually.
Nope.
I think it is a genuinely wise choice to choose to lose against the number one ranked player.
Yep.
If you are a top player, because it is not meta relevant. And that is a crazy sentence.
It is meta relevant, but it's a disproportionate usage of effort. Partially because, like, who are you going to practice against MinMin against? So, like, even if you are specifically practicing against MinMin, the practice you're getting is way lower quality. So it's not just the fact that it's like, oh, I could spend 1 hour practicing like beating Fox and 1 hour practicing beating MinMin, but like just the value, like you're gonna get better Fox practice. So it's not just like the fact that MinMin is less relevant, it's also that like the practice against her is just less efficient.
Like what we want to look at is like, what is your percentage chance of playing against MinMin in your bracket and not just being able to skill diff them?
Exactly.
And as you become a top level player, so the odds are higher as you're a lower skill player, or about the same as a top player would be. But the difference is as you become higher on the skill curve, you can afford to be disadvantageous to the matchup knowledge. Still win anyways because you're just that much better. And then go on about your day without having met the cost of the trade-off of, well, what if I practice Duck Hunt instead of MinMin, which is a character I'm unironically more likely to run into outside of pools or to make it out of pools.
Yeah.
So I think you're better off playing against Duck Hunt than you are playing against MinMin in general. Now, if your whole plan is to go for number one, then obviously there's going to be a tournament where you run into, and it does need to be on your back burner. But relatively speaking, the next tournament that you're going to probably does not have Doramigi in it, because Doramigi isn't just a rare character, but also a rare player. So your bracket is unlikely to have Dormigi in it in particular, even if you make it all the way to grand finals, because most Smash tournaments and even most majors do not have Dormigi in it. So it's just this is something that we've referenced before, but this is the card game problem of, is it okay for me to have unwinnable matchups?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is yes. You can. Sometimes the best choice is to have an unwinnable matchup and be ready to beat